Aloha kako. Thank you, Keone. My name is Dana Okano. I am director of our natural environment sector of programs at Hawaii Community Foundation, including our freshwater initiative is one of the programs in my portfolio. So I will be talking more about that in just a couple minutes here. But let me introduce the rest of my team. Faisha, if you want to say hello.
Aloha, good morning, everyone. My name is Faisha Solomon. I'm a program officer with Hawaii Community Foundation for our natural environment sector, specifically working on our freshwater initiative and our Hawaiian Islands Environmental Finance Center. And I will pass it to Kristen.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kristen Reynolds with One World, One Water, and I support the Hawaii Community Foundation's Freshwater Initiative in technical and policy capacity, and I'll get to share a little bit more about on-site reuse with you folks this morning.
And wrapping us up, we have Nanda Freeman, and she's for our C sector, our community economy sector. She's our program associate, and you will probably intersect with her if you haven't already in the future as we reach out to our builder community and connect our House Maui initiative with you folks and the work that you're doing. So just briefly, I want to give you an introduction of House Maui. We have our team here that works most directly with our House Maui initiative. But of course, housing is a priority for HCF. And so we do have our executive team that works very closely and coordinates on multiple aspects of our work with House Maui. For House Maui, we're always looking for the sweet spot where HCF really shines. There are a lot of needs in the housing ecosystem. There's a lot of opportunities, but we think that the intersection of our strengths, what's important and what's changeable, is really critical. And given our position as a grantor and our many relationships in the community through our grant-making programs, we do realize that we have a trusted space that we can hold and to bring conversations together and to find solutions together. Give me just a second. Here are our vision and mission. I think the vision statement could be a vision statement for any of our organizations. We're seeking prosperity and well-being for our community. Our mission with House Maui is to create a sustainable housing system that generates and keeps homes affordable for our kama'aina, enhances natural and cultural resources, and enriches our quality of life. And this is, I think a lot of times our housing needs and our natural and cultural values are pitted against each other. And we believe that there are ways of moving forward and supporting our housing needs as well as those other values. And we're set on trying to find those pathways. We have 3 pillars. This really gives you a sense of our strategy. And our first pillar is to align resources. And this is really looking at philanthropic resources, but more so our government resources, federal and state monies, as well as county monies. And how do we put these resources to our housing system? One way that we do that is through, or one way that we talk about that and enforce support that is through our regional plans. And in our regional plans, we identify all the housing projects that we know of that are coming up in Maui, identifying the challenges that they face or the steps in the entitlement process or whatnot that they're at. And then we also identify the infrastructure that could go in to support these projects. And so I encourage you, we'll put this up later, but housemaui.com, our latest regional plan should be up there within a day, and you can peruse through that at your own leisure. So besides aligning resources, making sure that government really puts the investment in infrastructure that we need, We also, our second pillar is educate and empower, and we recognize the need for education within our community. There are two sort of approaches to this. One is we're working to influence public opinion, and you may have seen some of our videos out there on YouTube and if you're scrolling through social media. And this is really just to start a conversation, and where we're heading with this is at least the current set of videos is looking at how we increase density, we increase walkability, we look at our current urban footprint and see how we can build within that. That I think is one of several key solutions to lowering costs. In that we lower infrastructure costs and find ways around some of the harder natural cultural issues that we have here on Maui. Besides that, we recognize the need to increase the capacity of our residents to become homeowners. And this work we do through our partners at HUD certified counseling agencies, specifically our key partners, Hawaiian Community Assets, and they work with folks, coaching, and working on credit counseling and things like that that enable folks to get to a point where they are home buyer ready. But it's not just about home buyers. Our families, many of them are renters, and we want to make sure that they when they need to move into a home, they have the financial know-how to do so. And just a snapshot of some of the impact that's happening through our Financial Opportunity Center. And certainly, you know, when new projects come online, it's critical that our families are ready to buy or rent. That's really critical to addressing the issues that we have before us. Finally, our third pillar is remake systems. We cannot continue to do things the way we're doing them. And remake systems is really evolves around policy and finding policies that address the needs of our community, address the needs of our housing ecosystem. We're looking at ways of designing policy and including voices before the policy gets in front of the county council, so that we're addressing the key issues around a policy. What happens so often, and I've seen this in previous council meetings, is that, you know, ideas, perspectives come forward, potential policies come forward, and they've considered some sort of aspects of the housing ecosystem, but certainly others come out and say, hey, that's not going to work for, you know, X, Y, or Z reasons. We want to try to address those reasons ahead of time, find ways of creating policies that sort of have real clarity on both the opportunity as well as the potential challenges, and have considered the potential challenges before the policy goes in front of policymakers. And just to give you a simple idea of how we're seeing this process, we're about to start it. We have a couple policies that we want to put before for internal discussion and then our policy network. And we'll see how that goes. One more note, we have a project with consultant Opticos looking at missing middle housing and looking for ways that Maui code can be enhanced in order to enable missing middle housing. And if you're not familiar with this term, you can see by the visual, it's really everything between single family homes and mid-rises. And this was a more common housing type, you know, last century, before building codes got become sort of the way they are now, not building codes, zoning codes. And we think that this is an opportunity to house more people for less. And so we're exploring this. Besides code changes, suggested code changes, we also have Opticos. They're going to produce some examples, real-time examples in our neighborhoods, showing what is possible within existing regulatory framework, as well as what's possible if some of those policies are changed and open up for missing middle housing. And I will stop there and I realized that there is some housekeeping that I didn't mention. If so, I skipped all of this. If you could please put your name and organization, introduce yourself in the chat. This is going to help us for House Maui to monitor and make sure we follow up with folks. I know that there are a few people here that are not on our list, and we want to make sure that you're on our builders list as well. As well, if you have questions, either about House Maui or the upcoming presentation, please put that in the chat as well. And we are going to cover those at the end. And we hope to have an opening for a discussion and really kind of delving into on-site water reuse and the issues that you folks are seeing and or your interests. So without further ado, I hand it over to Dana.
Great, thank you, Keone. Yeah, aloha again, everyone. So, you know, Keone, I think, said it perfectly earlier in that what we are looking to do is to find ways to marry and find the beneficial solution areas with housing and our natural resources. We think a thriving community includes sufficient housing and you know, our healthy ecosystems. So we really want to find that solution space. And so this is where our two initiatives intersect. And that's why we were wanting to have this conversation with you today. So I will be doing a brief introduction of our freshwater initiative, but I will probably have my team pop in and out to help clarify points as we go through the presentation. So yeah, again, just reiterating, if you have any questions, please drop them into the chat, and we hope to have a fruitful discussion at the end. So next slide. And so Keone covered this a little bit earlier also, you know, kind of HCF's role. Obviously, we're a philanthropic organization. So, you know, what is our role in this space? And it's really because we are a trusted convener in the community and able to help step into complex issues and help coordinate and facilitate discussions for actions that are needed moving forward. Next slide. So in looking at our water resources, we acknowledged, you know, probably at this point about a decade ago, looking at, you know, there's so many impacts from climate change that are going to be impacting our communities. One of the areas that we were looking at and wondering about is what about our long-term potable water supply? Because obviously water is the foundation for our life and our economy. And so in looking at some of the data, we were seeing that Hawaii is already seeing significant decreases in rain across the state. Next slide. And when you look at models of, you know, what is projected over, you know, coming years through the end of the century, you know, models do differ, obviously, but kind of consistent themes are that our drier areas are going to continue to get drier. So where we're already seeing less rain, we'll continue to see even less. Wet areas might get a little bit wetter, but what is also happening is it's not the traditional rainfall patterns that we have historically seen. The rainfall patterns are shifting, and so the rain is coming in fewer, heavier storms, which means more of the water is running off into our waterways and eventually into the ocean. So it's not staying on the land and recharging our groundwater aquifers. Next slide. Which is important because across the state, we get the majority of our drinking water from our groundwater aquifers. You know, it's here on Oahu where that is the highest percentage. It's like 90%. But even the other islands, we get a combination of both surface water and groundwater that is needed for our drinking water. Next slide. So as I mentioned about a decade ago, in looking at this data and these complexities, HCF pulled together stakeholders from kind of diverse backgrounds in the community, but all ones who touch water. And we formed an advisory council and asked the advisory council to help us come up with a plan for how to address this these changes that we're seeing. And so what they came up with is this no net loss goal of 100 million gallons per day that need to be of water that needs to be recaptured within our system. And that's a statewide goal. And they put the target on by 2030. Next slide. And so the goal is really broken down into three main component parts. It's really looking at water conservation measures, water recharge of that groundwater aquifer, and then water reuse or recycling. Next slide. And so when we look at water conservation, it's everything from fixing leaky pipes to reducing the amount of potable water that we're using for things like landscaping. And so finding other ways to achieve those goals. Next slide. In kind of specific to the new building connection that we're making here with this presentation. So that plays out in ways like one of the things that legislative bill that passed in, I think it was 2017, was requiring more frequent updates of the plumbing codes. And we like that and support that because it enables or actually requires in some cases that we have more efficient fixtures being put into buildings. Obviously, the higher efficiency, the more water conservation that comes out of that. Next slide. When we talk about water recharge, that kind of comes under two categories. It's largely the Mauka watershed restoration because that is where the majority of the rain falls. But it's also down in the built environment by implementing green stormwater infrastructure. So again, reducing the amount of water that is running off of the land and into the ocean and actually helping to hold it, retain it on land to give it time to percolate down into the groundwater. Next slide. And so this is just an example of how this can look. So for example, City and County of Honolulu, I know we're talking about Maui right now, but City and County of Honolulu actually adopted rules as requirements to meet certain retention levels from rainfall events. Even though these rules are not required on Maui, they're still best practices and the types of things that we would encourage folks to look at in kind of looking at the opportunities for building in a way that balances our natural resource needs and sustainability. Next slide. And then finally, water reuse or recycling. And so this is kind of the meat of what we'll start getting into more of our conversation. But water reuse obviously can be done at a larger utility scale. And we are working in partnership with water utilities across the state and looking for opportunities to make that happen. And so, that would do things like feed agriculture or other large landscaped areas. And, that's where we'll get the highest volume. But there are also opportunities for on-site in-building reuse. And so things like taking your sink water or your shower water and recycling it there in the building for toilet flushing or, landscaping locally. So there are opportunities and there are examples of where this is happening elsewhere. Next slide. As I mentioned, we have been doing a lot of kind of work in this space, and it shows up in several areas here. So just as examples, there was an upgrade to an existing law that was passed in 2016. It was Act 170 that actually requires all state and county buildings and facilities to start using reclaimed water, which is the same as reuse or recycled water, by 2045. So obviously the planning and starting to implement that needs to be happening now already. So that's something to think about. We worked on with the State Department of Health. They had a resolution. They formed a water reuse task force to look at opportunities across Hawaii. We participated in that. We also hired our own independent consultant who had done reuse across the country and actually even internationally to help look at what are the opportunities and barriers here in Hawaii and how can we work on those. And we're happy to share any of these reports with folks. And then ultimately in 2019, there was a actually, was this? Yeah, a bill passed, sorry, Act 202, for the State Department of Health to actually adopt on-site reuse rules, which they are in the process of now. And I know Kristen will be talking a little bit more about what that looks like. So all of this is kind of setting us up and getting to the place where we want to be to encourage more of the reuse to happen across Hawaii. Okay, next slide. Oh, okay, yeah. And the last thing I wanted to say about this, I mentioned other places are already doing this across the country. And so, for example, in 2019, sorry, everything pre-COVID is making my brain a little foggy. We actually worked out a site visit and had multiple developers from Hawaii join us in San Francisco to visit 2 different on-site reuse systems so that they could learn about what the systems look like, how they operate, what the options are. I think there has historically been a lot of concerns about what the systems, how they actually function, how much space they take. And so it was good to be able to take folks to actually see what, how far the technology has really progressed. And because of that, we were able to actually start having some really good conversations with some of the developers about this work. And again, we will talk, I think, a little bit more about this a little later, but to the point now that there are actually pilot projects underway that Department of Health is looking at. Once the pilots go through, they're going to kind of take the lessons learned from those pilots to actually implement the on-site reuse rules and establish the rules based on that. So there is a lot of work already happening in the system to get us to where we're trying to go. Next slide. As we were having all of these conversations and looking at all of this work with our freshwater initiative, one of the things that we started to recognize is the reality that a lot of the infrastructure needs in order to make our water systems more sustainable and resilient require larger dollar amounts than we locally have in Hawaii, right? Our water utilities are limited by what they can charge ratepayers. Obviously, our county and state governments, are always stretched thin on funding. And so it really means looking at what are the other funding sources. And so we started looking at, well, where else can we find money? And that is obviously federal dollars. And there's actually, out of all the federal agencies, there's actually quite a few you can see here with the red dots, ones that have dollars that could be used for various types of water infrastructure programs. Next slide. And then right around the same time, we were, looking into this and having these conversations internally about how do we help bring federal dollars into Hawaii. We got lucky because then the bipartisan infrastructure law passed, and now all of a sudden, through EPA alone, there's an additional $50 billion over a 5-year period going to various water infrastructure needs. Obviously, since that time, there have been other laws like the IRA and others that have also added to that pot. So really is now the time for us to look at going after and integrating these kind of water needs into our systems, because there is the money out there and we want to make use of it. Next slide. And so what we did is we started helping partners with this. And actually, I think I'm going to turn this over to my colleague Faisha to talk about a new center that we stood up to help folks with identifying and going after these federal dollars.
Okay, so again, I'm Felicia. I'll be talking a little bit about our new Hawaiian Islands Environmental Finance Center. But from the bipartisan infrastructure law, funding brought us funding for these new EFCs through EPA. So we recently launched or formally launched our Hawaiian Islands Environmental Finance Center this year. What we'll be providing is training and technical assistance to get organizations, agencies, to forms of federal funding. So through training and technical assistance, that'll include everything that will bring you to applying for federal funding. The second piece of the work that we're doing with our EFC is for career pathways and workforce development in the water workforce. So we have a partnership with UH, and what they're doing is research and assessment of their graduation to career pipelines and also assessing those water workforce gaps. And we also have a partnership with the Urban Sustainability Directors Network to administer a Hawaii Water Workforce Fellowship Program. So what they'll assist with is the recruiting, the mentoring, and administering the fellowship over the course of a year with utilities and other agencies here in Hawaii. So just a little bit more about our services. Like I said, we provide training and technical assistance. Training, whether that's in a group setting, like a webinar like this, one-on-one coaching, or individual meetings with specific organizations. That training can include anything from registrations to idea development for your application. What we will do is provide a needs assessment first and foremost, recommendations, assist with strengthening your and capacity building, and then of course assisting with grant applications for water infrastructure projects. So like I said, that could include research, idea development, grant writing, reviewing, and copy editing, and all the way through to submission support. We do also offer, through technical assistance, engineering and technical support. So we have Kristen for. She's our expert in the technical side of these projects. That could include project identification, development, and planning. And these projects should have should emphasize some form of the freshwater initiative goals in conservation, recharge, and reuse. And then for the fellowship program that I mentioned, we are offering those on an annual basis with up to 10 fellows per year. And those will likely be with utilities and other state agencies within the water sector. As a disclaimer, this program of the Freshwater Initiative is not a grant-making program, so we don't technically have dollars to grant out to folks, but we are here to provide the training and technical assistance needed to connect you with federal funding opportunities and guide you through the federal application process. And if you have more questions about this, we can address those at the end. I will also put a link to our website and our email address in the chat. And passing it to Kristen.
Thank you, Faisha. I know we've been talking at you for a little while, and I am going to share some technical details, so that's just a pre-warning. And we do have, I think, on the call, I just wanted to acknowledge Barry Usagawa and John Stuffel being there, both members of the Freshwater Council and our water utility leaders. And so thanks for joining. So first of all water is recycled water. There's should have put a more exciting graph here. There's shows like dinosaurs peeing and then drinking, like all water that we've all ever had is recycled. And I don't go down a rabbit hole. Actually, some of it's leaving the earth a little bit, and it did come from space, but it's all recycled. And so it's really all about how you treat it and what you use it for. So reusing water is not a new thing. I think anyone who has a systems brain, which I think a lot of you in your housing systems probably do, can understand that there's cycles and ways to recycle and reuse. Next slide. I just tried to use the arrow. So the thing we wanted to share specifically today was about in-building reuse, which is also called on-site reuse. So this diagram here outlines all the different types of water that is generated or used in a building. So there's black water, which is defined as your toilets, dishwasher, kitchen sinks, the stuff that goes down the drain from those. It can also include gray water, and gray water is only the drains from your bathtubs, showers, and washers. So no toilets in gray water. So that's a differentiation between gray water and black water, if you've ever heard those terms. There's also condensate water that comes from the air conditioning equipment. There's foundation drainage. And then on this other side, on the right, you have rainwater, which can collect from the roof, evaporative cooling, and also stormwater, which hits the surfaces that are all around your development, especially any paved surfaces. So these are all actually potential resources for you to think about in incorporating type of on-site reuse. Next slide. Some of the identified on-site reuse uses, so that was where the supply, what you could use the water from, but where would you take that recycled water and how could you then use it on your property? So of course it would have to be treated. So this is showing a diagram of, it's a little small, but of your air conditioning condensate going and cooling tower condensate going through a recycled water system. And ultimately they're then using that for flushing the toilets, because why do we need it's a perfectly good use to use recycled water for toilet flushing and leave the really potable water for drinking. So some of the other uses for on-site are toilet flushing, irrigation, cooling tower makeup, clothes washers, process water, and decorative fountains. Another term that we use for this type of water is non-potable, so just all the uses that you use for water that aren't drinking. Next slide. And we wanted to share that we do have one being built right now. Kule Place with Kobayashi Group is the lead on that. They have, as Dana alluded to, Department of Health has approved their on-site reuse system for this development. So they are going to be using the gray water, so the water from the showers and sinks, and they're going to be using that for both their toilet flushing and their irrigation. And if you care about numbers, the volumes are there. So they've got about 40,000 gallons per day of supply that they're collecting and treating. And then they are going to be using about 25,000 gallons per day for the toilets and about 5,000 gallons per day for irrigation. And we're very excited about it. And it's something that's technically very easy to do. But as Dana showed you, there's been a long lead up for the kind of regulatory support to get to the place where we are today. Next slide. So we wanted to leave a little bit of time. I just had those few slides, they were dense, so we're happy to answer questions on it. But we really wanted to leave time to focus on questions around incorporating on-site reuse into the work that you folks do. And some of the framing questions we wanted to pose, but we'll open it up to any questions that you have, are: is water a limiting factor on how many units or how many buildings are approved in the work that you're doing? Seeing very quickly, and maybe you need some time to think about it, seeing quickly what types of alternative water buildings generate, which ones do you think you would consider? What questions do you have about those to be able to move those into kind of an idea phase for some of the work you have? And then what are your higher water uses if you're familiar with the types of water your buildings or developments use? Typically, the easier uses are to use reuse water are those outdoor water uses. And another idea that could work well is if there's large outdoor landscaped areas even adjacent to your property that use a lot of irrigation. So those were some of the considerations that we wanted to throw out there. But I do also, I think we have one more slide and we can come back to these questions, but I do also want to leave time for any questions that anyone had about any of this content. I knew we threw a lot at you, and of course we have many more resources to share too. So this is just a teaser. If anyone's interested, I have 1,000 reports and links, and I could also just send you like the top 2 or 3. With that, Dana, anything to close, or should we open it up for discussion? I think, Faisha, there's a next slide that just says thank you and questions.
Yeah, I think I want to open it up for question and discussion because, yeah, I agree. It's a lot of information. It's pretty dense, and we were actually trying to keep it high level, so we can definitely do deep dives on any of these points.
Any questions from the group? Drop them in chat, or I think you can just feel free to speak also.
I'll go. This is Ryan. Can
Great.
you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Hey, Ryan Churchill, Pacific Rim Land. Since this is Maui focused, I know there's the reuse discussion, but in our project here at Lapoa and projects in the past, the availability of R1 water, we're close to the Kihei wastewater plant, is just critical. And the amount of water that's going in the injection wells in all regions on Maui, or at least central, west, and south Maui, is so significant that, just a comment that I think the focus should be there. I know you can look at reuse in buildings, but it doesn't move the needle compared to extending an R1 line to a new neighborhood, extending an R1 line to county parks, and just really think that's where the needle is going to be moved. It one, it reuses the R1 water versus injecting it, and 2, it frees up potable water for additional housing units to be built. So just wanted to throw that out there. It's an obvious one. I know it's expensive, but if there's any focus, I think that moves the needle more than anything.
Thank you, Ryan. I'll let Dana go first. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can share a little bit more. So as I mentioned, we actually have been working quite a bit in the reuse space on different aspects of it. And so we actually have been working with the Maui wastewater team for a couple of years now. So one of the things, remember I was talking about us really focusing on trying to help agencies bring in federal dollars. So one of the things that we worked with the Maui wastewater folks on was they actually are eligible for Bureau of Reclamation dollars, specifically for expansion of the Lahaina wastewater treatment plant. And so we worked with them to get them to apply for the first round of those dollars to start to build out those extension lines. Obviously the work is a little bit paused and slow right now after the fires, but they were awarded that, and so they can start moving on that. And then, once they get through that phase, then there's more money in that pot that they can access. And then related to that, we also worked with them to help bring in an earmark, or what is now called congressionally directed spending. And for that is to start looking at Kihei, exactly what you're talking about, and upgrading the systems there. So yeah, we really are tackling it from all sides. And you guys on this call and looking at on-site reuse in new buildings that are coming up, that is just another piece of the pie, but we are looking at the whole pie. Kristen, feel free to add any more.
I'm really excited, Ryan, that there's the demand and awareness of wanting R1. That's great to hear from somebody else's mouth besides ours.
Well, we have some great questions in the chat, and so I'll highlight some of those. From John, curious about the long-term maintenance of on-site reuse in buildings. Have you heard anything from projects that have been in use for 5 to 10 plus years? What is the maintenance or servicing load consideration for the design of these systems?
That's a great question. Thanks, John, for that question. We obviously haven't had them in Hawaii, but in San Francisco, we have seen those. And in terms of maintenance, it's important to build the maintenance costs and operation and maintenance costs into your financial model. You will need to carry a licensed, if you're doing reuse, recycled facility, you'll have to have a licensed operator. And Department of Health right now is looking at the rules. That's part of the revision to the rules that they're working on, is they're trying to make all of the testing and compliance reasonable for the scale while still protecting public health. So typically looking at least monthly reporting, but not daily sampling. And operation maintenance, we could go way down a rabbit hole. So happy to share more on the details of what the variance process Department of Health has done so far. So I would say it's not insignificant. You need to think about your operation and maintenance, but it is solvable, and it seems to work across, especially if the opportunity is you didn't have enough water, you know, without that, or when we're seeing the water rates increase, you know, from water utilities, it starts to really pencil out to include those operation maintenance costs. But really good point. You have to have a certified operator.
We have some related questions to your point, but before that, Dana, go ahead.
Sorry, yeah, I was just going to add that from what I have observed, most of the systems, like when you are working with the reuse system provider, most of them offer and include that operations and maintenance package, right? They don't just build it and walk away. That's usually part of the package.
So you mentioned, Kristen, that there are no examples here, but John is asking, any examples of on-site reuse at hotels, maybe here, or if there's a special use case elsewhere for hotels?
There are hotels. It's hard to define if they're considered on-site reuse. None of the hotels use it for toilet flushing. Maybe I'll ask John or Barry if they know of an example, but I know the hotels, some hotels have their own wastewater treatment system. And then if they treat that to high enough quality, in theory, they could be using that for irrigation on property. That would probably be considered and regulated under the traditional wastewater treatment facilities and not on-site. But let me see, John or Barry, not to put you on the spot, but do you have an example in mind of a hotel? And if not, that's okay. Just remain silent.
So which John? You mean me, John, or another John?
You, John, Stufflebean,
Okay.
Maui. I know you're not wastewater, but I thought maybe you would know since.
Well, my career has been largely in wastewater. So
Yeah.
I mean, what we need is it really only works, I think, on a large building, and you can't do this on small buildings. And I was involved with the one in San Francisco, and so then I look at, well, what are the large complexes in Maui? Well, it's mostly hotels, so that's where you want to see if this can work. The typical ones I know of in office buildings, where it's a different mix of how many restrooms are there and how could you do the plumbing and all that. So I'm just wondering if there's any hotel possibilities. I think you're right. I think really it's more of take the wastewater, treat it at a high level, and use it on site probably is a better answer for hotels. But I just wonder if you'd run across any other examples of how that could work at a hotel. I don't know of any. So other than that.
Okay, thanks, John. Thanks for letting me put you on the spot. Next time I'll use a last name too.
And on a related note, you touched on this in terms of state law, and Michelle asks, don't these need changes in state law or admin rules and or county standards? On a related note as well, I'd like to ask, like, where I understand that there's some movement. Where are we now, and what can developers start thinking about in terms of water reuse within the next couple years
Great.
under state law?
Okay, great. Yep. I'll do a very high level regulatory framework without hopefully boring everyone. But so the State Department of Health has authority over the water quality. So what you can use, what water you can reuse and what it has to be treated to, and then what you can use it for. Like, can you put it in your toilets? Can you irrigate it with spray? Can you do drip irrigation? Those types of public health potential issues are governed by the Department of Health. And then how you plumb it and what specifications you need to do is governed by your county, and that's under the plumbing code. So as Dana mentioned, the plumbing codes now are at this state and moment in time are up to date, and they have all of the how to plumb on-site reuse in the current codes. So that's all good, ready to go. In terms of the state, what you can use it for, your typical R1, like recycled water guidelines have been updated. But when we talk about on-site reuse, what's important to make it viable is that the state law is a little more, easier on some of the testing and operating requirements, and have slightly different requirements for the on-site system because you're not a big treatment plant, right? So they wanted to make, in order to make it even feasible, you need some small tweaks to some of those requirements to happen in a building. So where we are with that is Department of Health has granted a variance and has specifications about what those operation maintenance testing requirements will be for 2 pilot projects. And there's been state legislature urging Department of Health to move from just doing that by variance and kind of one-offs to institutionalizing that in rule changes. And we continue to have conversations with them about those rule changes. And it's a little bit chicken or egg because they want to have the rules tested before they go through the whole process of doing the rule change, right? So we're getting through some pilot projects right now. So I would say if there's developers interested, they're certainly open to having more conversations. But we know ideally in a developer's world, you'd like it in law rules, hard coded, so you know exactly what you're dealing with. But we're in that kind of in-between space between the pilot and the formal rules being established, if that addresses question.
That's very helpful. Yeah, thank you. One more, folks, if you have more questions, please put them in the chat. I have one more question I see from Matt. How has the Supreme Court decision against Maui County's use of injection wells affected Maui County's reuse or have impacts on this conversation at all?
I guess I'll keep going, Dana, unless you many places like San Francisco and other places, maybe even Colorado, are using reuse because of a driver of drought. They don't have enough water. And while we see that as water experts, we see that because you look at our numbers and we see it coming, but more even so than to reduce your potable water use, a lot of it is offsetting the disposal is a real big driver for reusing water. Right now, we're just sending perfectly good resource that could be treated to a higher quality out to the ocean at a quality that's, especially in the ejection wells through there, at a quality that's not great for our reefs or for public exposure. And so that is a real driver here in Hawaii, especially on Maui, for wanting the wastewater facilities to upgrade and find areas for that reclaimed water is to reduce the amount that you're putting into the ejection well. and especially by law now that's going to become harder and harder for injection wells to be used anywhere on island. So that's definitely a big driver for reuse. Did I miss anything, Dana?
No, that was good. I think, just what I would add to a couple of these questions. So like with this one, with the Supreme Court decision, I think, yeah, kind of the point of what we are getting at with this initiative is that there are other options and there are better ways of doing it. And yes, there's a lot of things that should be done, like the question earlier, shouldn't we be focused on, the large municipal Lahaina, Kihei systems? Yes, of course. And yes, we should be working on that. What we're saying is, and there are also opportunities with this work that you are doing here, right? Because in order to address these challenges that we're facing, like needing to respond to the Supreme Court decision and the fact that Maui already has water challenges and limitations in some areas, it means thinking outside the box and doing things a little bit different. And it means all of us having to do our part within the realms, within our respective realms, right? So I think that's kind of the point of all of this work, where we're going is just a need to rethink things, because it's not someone else is going to fix that for us. We're past that in terms of where we are with climate change and with our water resources. We're now at a stage where, okay, we all need to think about it and we all need to help find solutions in the space. I do want to go back to the hotel question. So, obviously I can't name names without permission, but I will say that there was a hotel owner that did join us in San Francisco for those site visits, and they were interested in they were looking at doing a restoration of an existing hotel here in Hawaii, and they were looking at the on-site reuse systems. They were interested in what they saw, and I think just COVID changed those plans, like COVID changed many plans. I'm still hopeful that they will reconsider that, but we would love to see another hotel step up and be willing to be the pilot for that here in Hawaii.
Awesome. As people are thinking of their questions, raise your hand or put it in the chat. I have a couple questions as well.
Sure.
We've the presentation is focused on water reuse that doesn't get people as squirmish. And what I mean is, taking the water reuse and going to R0 and getting that water to a point where it can come through all your pipes. Is that something that you guys have sort of in the work plan out in the future? Is that something that you're even considering exploring?
It is definitely done in other places. We are not advocating for it per se yet here in Hawaii. I think there's other steps that can be taken first, and let's hope we don't get to the point where we need to consider direct potable reuse. But we're hopeful that by integrating these other steps, we'll avoid needing to consider that step, if that makes sense. And I would say from our conversations with State Department of Health, I think they're also kind of in the same place and feeling like we're not quite there yet. Let's not go down that road just yet. Let's work on these other avenues first.
A few more questions popped up, and I think I'm going to jump to the desalination question. When we talk about water and reuse and sort of increasing sources, desalination becomes a topic. Could you folks share sort of your reaction and insights around desalination, where that fits in here?
The short answer is it's more expensive. And I will let Kristen, and this is definitely where Barry can weigh in, because I know Honolulu Board of Water Supply is actually doing a pilot desal plant because they're trying to wrap their head around what that possibility is. So Barry, if you want to jump in, you can. And Kristen, please.
Sure. I think we have had several conversations about desal, and it's really an important piece of the puzzle, and it's a good alternative source to have in the mix. But as Dana mentioned, it is very expensive. Salt is a very fine particle, and it's one of the hardest particles to remove from water because it's so small. It's easier to remove other biological contaminants from water, and so that's kind of that's the more ideal. It's easier to treat that, so treat that all to your max first, and then you can have salt water in the mix. And thanks, Barry, for letting us put you on the spot if you want to add a little bit about how expensive desal is, or any other about the desal mix in your water supply portfolio.
It's so interesting. I just can you hear me?
Yes, you sound good.
I just came out of a dentist chair, man.
Oh no.
Awesome. Yeah, no, we're working on design, build, operate, maintain contract for a seawater desalination plant in Cambo Industrial Park. And we're in the design and permitting stage. It's been challenging. Certainly the project is it is expensive, but we got a lot of federal grants and low interest loans. So I want to thank the federal agencies for that. Just the timing was right with the financing. It's just 2 million gallon, just under that per day. And it's just enough to provide water to the Cambo Industrial Park. And then the water that is serving the park gets to be redirected towards Eva's growth. So that's what we're doing. Online, we're looking at the end of 2027, my retirement date. And so far, it's so good. If you have any questions, let me know. But yeah, it is definitely part of a diversified water portfolio, right? So conservation, reuse, storm desalination, groundwater, non-potable, brackish water for irrigation as well. So we're trying to put all the supplies in because there's a lot of people here, and match the quality to the use is the idea. And then for every gallon that you can, not pump from the ground or not divert from a stream, that's restoration, or that's more aquifer water for drought mitigation. So there's a lot of those types of benefits and climate change, of course, as you folks were saying earlier. So those are the reasons why we're pursuing it. But it's all part of this really diverse portfolio. Thank you.
Thanks, Barry. Your teeth look great.
Oh my God.
I have one follow-up question for around desalination. I know we're getting close, or we're at time. But our team here is ready to stick around for another half an hour. If folks want to have smaller group conversations, you want to follow up with conversations like specific to your work, you're very welcome to stick around. Our team is going to be here. We have two more questions, but one follow-up question around desal, and it's about the waste product from desalination and the potential challenges in addressing the waste from that.
Right, and then thank you for that. Yeah, there are two big issues with desalination. It's what you do with the brine and the large power costs, because it takes a lot of power to make fresh water out of seawater, of which we have future plans for PV. The harder question is what to do with the brine. In Cambo Industrial Park, it happens to be an underground injection control area, so we're just injecting it into the ground. But unlike the wastewater treatment plant injection well, a brine is denser, so it'll sink. And when it sinks down into the lower cap rock and it makes its way out to the ocean, it's not like and it's deep enough to not affect the nearshore waters or the benthic environment in the nearshore, and then eventually it'll blend with the seawater there. So that's what we're doing. Trying to discharge that into an ocean outfall is problematic because of the environmental. So it just so happened that we have the right conditions to make that happen. Thanks.
Yeah, I can add to that. So so we are in the middle of a study with Brown and Caldwell to look at desalination on Maui, and they've done a lot of good work already. We started about almost a year ago, and they've concluded the same thing that Honolulu did, which is that the technology is still reverse osmosis. We were hoping something more would come along, but that's still the best technology. Has been the best technology for 50 years. And energy, solar PV is probably the best way to provide the energy. So you need to find a site where there's access or availability to do that. And then well injection is probably the best solution for the brine discharge. And as mentioned was, it is heavier, so it does sink. And so my first reaction to that was no way, but they've kind of convinced me that it's at least worth considering. So we have 4 site areas that we are looking at on Maui as a possibilities. And I agree. I mean, I think it's part of our portfolio going forward for sure. It is the one where there's an unlimited supply. Obviously, it's more expensive, but if we didn't have these other sources, that's what we'd be doing. So, there are places where they have no choice and they do it and it works. So, yeah. So just so you know, we are looking at that. It's a long-term thing, and I think we're getting ready to start going out with public outreach and figuring out how do we integrate this into our system. So that's where you're on Maui. Thanks.
Thank you, John. Our final question for now, as we transition to maybe a smaller group of folks that want to go deeper. Cassandra asks, well, she describes one of our challenges and asks whether we can help. Can you help counties seek federal funds? And the question I want to add to this is for anyone that's gathered here and want to explore on-site reuse, want to explore funding opportunities, who do they reach out to? Is our team here? What things do we deal with, and what things might not be in our wheelhouse?
Yeah, thank you for that, Keone, and thank you, Cassandra, for the question. So yes, that is one of the key roles that we are doing through our Hawaiian Islands Environmental Finance Center that Faisha described earlier. And so that center grew out of our freshwater initiative work, and it is focused on helping agencies to bring in federal dollars specifically to address water infrastructure needs around water conservation, reuse, and recharge. And you can think of those categories quite broadly, right? If it's, hey, we want to put in more efficient fixtures in our affordable housing development because we know ultimately that will save on water costs. Great, let's look for federal funds to help you do that. Definitely, if you're looking at on-site reuse systems, yes, that's something that we would want to help with. And so it's, I guess what I'm saying is, obviously different federal funding has different requirements. So we are willing to help others in the community. So, if you're working on affordable housing development, we're willing to also help you as long as you are eligible for receiving those federal funds, or your partner, however you have the partnership. And then obviously, yes, the county government agencies are eligible to receive federal funds. So yes, we can help them directly.
Awesome. So thank you folks for joining. Again, we'll just transition here to anyone who wants to stick around and ask more questions. I see a extended comment by Sneh. I hope I pronounced that correctly. But yeah, feel free if you have to go, your lunch hour, or it's not lunch, you have another meeting to make it to. Feel free to sign off. Otherwise, you can come off mute and ask questions, and let's engage in a conversation here.
Yeah, Keone, I just referenced as this is Sneh, and you said it right. It's just that, right now, we just went to a homeowners meeting yesterday for homeowners, looking to rebuild their homes in Waikuli. That's where we have a home we're going to rebuild. And, one of the things is they're going to allow us to rebuild and go back onto cesspool. And it seems like the one slide showing how much federal money there is. One thing that the Army Corps says they'll pay for the system design in Waiakuli to be placed on sewer at some future date, which then the county has to plan for and fund, right? So they'll pay for the system design, but not actually the infrastructure that goes around for that. And then, you know, at the same time, if the money is there now to tap into, it just seems like a win-win for that whole area to do all of this stuff while the rebuilding's happening. And so, you know, it's just, I know that you're focused on helping individuals get access to those grants, but, you know, I don't know where the county's at with that process right now and tapping into that for this specific need, because, you know, having to rebuild my house or others, individuals in that area, having to rebuild their house, go back on a cesspool, and then to convert to sewer years later doesn't make sense to me, especially the fact that, you know, this reuse system, I mean, I'd love to implement that as I'm rebuilding my house right up there. It just makes sense, especially with watering the landscaping and using it to flush toilets. So I think all of that needs to be part of the plan and design, you know, and give that option and access to money for those to implement.